Okay, so here's the front panel piece. So this is both the left and the right shirt front. This bit here folds away. So we fold that in and we fold that in again. So that's the facing. So in the pocket, I added interfacing to give it structure. You can do the same again if you want to, but the pattern doesn't call for it. It's just something I've always done. So you folded it up twice and then you sew your buttons and your buttonholes in these places and you top stitch that facing down. Hopefully you can see that. So you can see that fold there. Now, that's super duper. So I've cut all my fabric out. I tried to find a contrast because what I would like is that when you get a flash of the inside of the shirt, you see a completely different fabric and something that would contrast with that. So you'll need a strip of fabric that sits there and that will fold away and then will be on that side of your shirt. So what we need to do is unfold this and measure that amount of fabric is going to be just under 7.5 centimetres. Yeah, but I need to sew it onto this piece, so I need a seam allowance. So if I make it a small seam allowance so it doesn't interfere with these buttons and buttonholes. So if I say I have a seam allowance of 1 centimetre, I will still have space for a buttonhole. So let's cut a strip of fabric the length of this pattern piece and 8.5 centimetres. Right, there we go. So that strip is going to be sat there. It's going to fold over after I've attached it to the main part of the fabric. So I need to trim away the amount of fabric I don't need. So that's going to be 7.5 minus the 1 centimetre I need for seam allowance. So I'm going to actually cut away 6.5 centimetres off this. So that's 7.5. Sorry, that's 7.5. Just double check that. There, just short of 7.5. And I'm going to make this just 1 centimetre shorter. So that actually measures, and the best way to do this actually is to get your seam guide. If you're struggling with the actual number, grab your seam guide. And this is what's great about this, is you don't actually need to worry about numbers. You can just position that exactly like that and let the seam guide do the actual numbers for you. It is just short of 7.5. Right, so I'm going to take off 1 centimetre. So that takes it to just 6.5. And let's get rid of one strip because I'm going to use the other piece to show you darts and things like that. So let's mark this a couple of times. Like that. Okay, so that's a strip we don't actually need. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to sew this good sides together. And don't worry, I've got it a bit longer than I need to. I can trim it off. I'll sew that down and I can trim it off. Right, so here's the machine set up. I've got a walking foot on there at the moment, but that's okay. We can do this with the walking foot. Just pop a needle in on that 1 centimetre seam allowance and lock that stitch. Use 2.5 inside, a 2.5 seam. Use a 2.5 stitch. Lock your stitches at the other end. Right. Just remove those pins. And then what we need to do, you don't need to trim or clip this. I'm just going to press that over and press it over twice and then do the top stitch. Give that a quick press. Okay. I'm going to press it towards my placket. Make sure, grab all of that. Okay. And then what happens is this gets folded up to the line there. This is where you use your Placket. Give it a nice crease and then fold that in so that when you fold that in, your fabric, your contrasting fabric is just under the fold. And the top stitch line from that fold is here. So what I can do is fold that over. That measures 3.5 centimetres. So keeping that seam guide in place, I can mark my top stitch line, or use a seam guide, the magnetic seam guide on your sewing machine. But if you're going to mark it like I did on the pocket, use a pen that can you know, wash away like I did. So just pop a couple of pins in there just to hold it. I'm going to keep them away from my top stitching. And again, what you can do is use the overcast foot on the other side. So you can use the overcast foot on the other side to give you a nice top stitch. But the thing is, I don't want to do that because it's a visual thing. So I want to make sure I've got that distance measured accurately. Because if I do it on there and I might have a slight curve that you can't really tell, but you can tell something's off. When you look at the shirt, you can tell something's off. You're not sure what it is. So you want it to be exact. So draw that line on and then sew it down. And I can see that I can, the stitches hit inside the fold there, but just miss it. So I might actually reduce the seam line. So if this happens to you, just reduce it by 2 millimeters. It's better that you reduce it by a couple of millimeters and get a good finish that looks aesthetically pleasing to your eye than have something that's off and doesn't work. And I need this to hold the facing. So I've only taken off 2 millimeters. I don't even think I've gone 2 millimeters. I've gone 1.5 millimeters shorter. So rather than it being 3.5, so 3.5, I'm actually 3.35. Okay, so follow that line all the way. and top stitch that. Once you've top stitched it, all that's left is to mark where your buttonholes go. So it'll be where the buttonholes go and where the buttons go. And we'll do a buttonhole and button session. But if you want to move on to that quickly, I've done that in the waistcoat as well. And again, if you wanted to use interfacing, don't be put off. Right, there you go. Top stitch done. I've got a nice enough finish on the back, and it holds the facing perfectly for me. Next thing is to put the buttonholes on there. Do that on the other side as well. So in the next video, we are going to be moving on to the next step. Once I've done this on my main shirt on both sides, I'm going to leave the buttons and buttonholes until I've done the cuffs, so I do it all in one go. So in the next video, I'm going to be adding the yoke to the back, the extra little bit that goes at the top of the shirt on the back piece, and then we'll join the front and the back pieces together. Time to practice this skill. Make sure you've got it down before you actually start working it on your main fabric. You don't want to spend money on fabric and ruin it, so make sure you've got your skills sorted. If you like that video, please like and comment. Thank you to you if you subscribe. If you don't, consider subscribing. We've got so much more to do, and ring that bell to get notifications. Take care.